Today, we are welcoming back to the program Congressman Ro Khanna, representing California's 17th District, located in the heart of Silicon Valley. Congressman, always great to have you on.
Great to be on.
So let's just start with the COVID relief bill. Popular with 76% of Americans, even 60% of Republicans. Rarely do you see such agreement among 330 million Americans on anything. $1.9 trillion. Many people wondering, what are we waiting on right now exactly?
Well, we're going to pass it this week in the House, and then it goes to the Senate. So we're waiting, as often, on the Senate. And most of the bill is going to go through. The big debate, as you know, is whether the minimum wage will be part of it, the increase to $15.
Is at this point, do you think that understanding how popular the bill is nationally, that Republicans in the Senate are really going to stand in the way, or will some of them take the more pragmatic approach of realizing that this is popular even with many of their constituents and it makes sense to be on the right side, so to speak?
You would think that, but that's not the indication. I mean, when you have Mitt Romney coming out saying that this is too big a bill and too much spending, I mean, if he's not going to be for it, doesn't give me much hope that you're going to get many Republicans for it. So I expect, unfortunately, that this will be a straight party line vote.
How soon would the stimulus deposits and or checks start getting to people if it was passed sometime next week?
It would be a few weeks typically. I mean, I know in the previous administration, it dragged on for months, and we still have some people who are asking about the $600 check from last time. So I hope we've learned from that. Typically, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for people to see the check after the president signs it.
In your mind, would this be the last COVID stimulus?
I hope not. I have called with Tim Ryan since the COVID crisis began for monthly checks because people's rent comes due every month. There are a lot of folks who aren't getting the unemployment benefits. I think we have to continue until the crisis is over, until our economy is fully open again. And I'm going to continue to push for that.
What metrics would you look at to determine when that is, I guess?
I would look at the unemployment rate, but not just the unemployment rate, but people who have opted out of the workforce. I would look at the infection rate and the prevalence and seeing how much we've been able to open up our economy again.
The $15 minimum wage, which is part of the version that is currently in your chamber in the House of Representatives, if that doesn't ultimately get included in the bill, is that the next thing you'd like to see Congress take up, or is there something else?
I would, because it's the one thing that represents structural change. So the bill is very important. It gets money to state and local governments. It gets money for vaccines. It gets money of cash for every individual. But it's not structurally changing the economy. The minimum wage does. It would fundamentally increase wages for people. The challenge is, and Bernie Sanders made this point yesterday, that you can't do the minimum wage without reconciliation. They're just not 60 votes. So
Yeah.
you either have to get rid of the filibuster or you have to do reconciliation, which is why it's so important to get this in the current bill.
When we talk about the immigration situation, we covered on the program earlier this week how Joe Biden did very quickly do this executive order to stop the removals of undocumented immigrants back to a number of different countries. But a judge very quickly kiboshed that. And since, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe Biden has not attempted with a different legal justification to do another executive order. And I've read a number of interesting legal assessments that say if Joe Biden was really determined to do this, there are a number of other ways that he could word and structure executive orders. It was very narrowly stopped by this Texas judge. And Joe Biden hasn't done that. I've said that I think that if indeed this is the priority Joe Biden said it would be, and that I believe it should be, he should be going right back at this with another executive order and another. What do you think?
I agree with you. I mean, I think that we shouldn't let one judge stop the process of having a more humane immigration policy. And the biggest concern to me are the kids. And I'm sure you read also on the detention.
Yep.
And sending them there. Now, there are alternatives. You can have community detention, you can community placement, and it's a question of having the resources and a plan. So I think that this has to be looked at. I'm on Pramila Jayapal's roadmap for immigration. She's going to be putting out a plan on how we keep our borders safe, but are not treating most of the migrants coming over, particularly kids, as criminals.
So if Joe Biden doesn't do it, if he just leaves it as I did an executive order and a judge stopped it, and I guess now we have to wait, would you consider that a failure?
I don't think that's true to what he ran on. I mean, every Democratic candidate running said that we were going to look at the inhumane Trump policy and return to a policy of not criminalizing most people crossing the border. That it is a civil infraction. You can be sent back, but there has to be a move that we aren't treating mothers and kids as criminals, and that we're placing them in community placements instead of these detention centers.
Mm. In terms of the makeup of the House of Representatives right now, when we look at national polling among Republican voters, for the most part, the support of the former president, Trump, is still significant. Something like 80% of Republicans want him to remain involved. 64% said if he split off and started his own party, that they would follow him. Now, I expect that in practice, those numbers would be lower. I think the idea of splitting off is more appealing than actually doing it. But needless to say, for the time being, there's continued support among the Republican Party for the former president. What is your assessment right now of the impact within your legislative body of the presence of folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn, who arguably are only even there by riding on the coattails of Trumpism in the last 6 months of 2020?
Well, they've been marginalized from the body, but the challenge is that there were almost 140 Republicans who voted for the opposing the certification of the election.
Yeah.
And that's not just some of these extreme cases. And so the decision the Republican Party has to make, and it's a very difficult decision, is how do they move beyond Trump without abdicating their base? And I don't think any Republican actually has figured that out. I mean, you have Nikki Haley taking a different side of the equation every day because they're trying that balancing act. But and they've seen the consequences of a Liz Cheney or someone who tries a clean break. And until they are able to get a coherent vision of a post-Trump future, they're going to struggle.
Is it naive to think that this fracturing, particularly if this divide becomes more noticeable, if Donald Trump does start his own party, or if he announces at CPAC on Sunday that he's running as a Republican in 2024, any of these things that might fracture these two sides, is it naive for me to think that it's an opportunity for the left to get things done while they are fighting amongst themselves?
Well, I think for the sake of the country, it would be better to have a coherent party that rejects racism and that moves beyond Trump. But what I would say is we have all the tools we need, but we don't even have to focus right now on the Republicans. What we have to do is focus on how controlling the House, controlling the Senate, and the presidency, we get our things through. And we ought to be doing aggressively through reconciliation, the $15 wage, the COVID relief, infrastructure, and expanding healthcare. So I think we have an opportunity to deliver on our agenda.
On healthcare, what do you see as the next step, not in a perfect world where we might be talking about Medicare for all or something else, but based on what Joe Biden ran on? Is it a simple, let's establish a public option? What is it that you see as the immediate next step on healthcare?
Well, we should expand Medicare, and he ran on expanding it to 60. That seems to me an easy lift. We should look at how we at least get a public option that is affordable as a step towards a single player. I mean, I believe fundamentally Medicare for all is the right solution.
Right.
But if what I would say is let's look at any step in the lens of is it getting us closer to that ultimate goal, and we should support those parts that are helping us move in that direction.
In your mind, does this have to be done before 2022 because we simply don't know who will control what after that point?
I do. I mean, I think it has to be done not for the sake of politics. When people say, oh, if you don't do this, you'll lose the House. I just think it's so rare in American politics that you have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And if we don't do this, who knows when all those stars align again. We're working very, very hard to make sure we keep the House. I know Senator Schumer's working hard to keep the Senate, and I think we have a very good chance. But politics is unpredictable. And while we have this opportunity, let's deliver on some structural change to improve people's lives.
In terms of the day to day in the House, we've had these stories about metal detectors, and we've learned about Congressman Cawthorn saying that with his wheelchair, he's able to actually have multiple firearms with him, and it's not obvious to others that's what's going on. Are you feeling worried day to day about firearms at the Capitol?
I personally am not, but I worry for colleagues. I worry for some of the women of color who've been subject to many death threats. I worry for people who have been outspoken and targets on right-wing media. And then I'm sad for our country that every time I go to the Capitol, it's basically a fortress. You have barbed wire, you have the National Guard. I mean, it's a sad thing that we've created that distance between government and people because of the threats that are there on the building.
So you're not necessarily changing your protocol, but much has changed at the Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is more vigilant. That's just common sense. And me and our team are more vigilant. We probably lock the doors more. We're more careful. We're making sure that we're not taking unnecessary risks. But personally, I don't feel threatened in the way that some of my colleagues, unfortunately, have been threatened.
Yeah. You mentioned infrastructure, and this is such a big topic now, particularly in light of what happened in Texas last week.
Yes.
And of course, we've gone into detail about the way the Texas grid works, the reality of it's very plausible to winterize wind turbines. Wind turbines are not the cause of this issue. But can you talk a little bit about what would a green infrastructure deal look like? What would be the most important things to include in terms of the types of subsidies maybe that would be put in place, the types of jobs that we should be looking to create, how we should be managing the reality that for the most part, we still do get most of our energy from fossil fuels at this point in time?
Well, David, I chair the subcommittee on the environment, and we're going to be holding a hearing on what happened in Texas. And you're absolutely right. But one of the questions we're going to ask with ERCOT is it's actually cheaper to weatherize wind turbines than it is to weatherize natural gas pipelines. So shouldn't this incident have us move towards renewable energy that's easier to weatherize, that's easier to build infrastructure around? We need to be making that kind of investment in renewable energy generation, in battery storage, in electric vehicles. And all of these things are going to create jobs. And we ought to have the federal government help finance it or take equity in it, because these are large capital projects in building the modern infrastructure for the new energy economy. That is something that's jobs, good jobs, and it's also something that's going to help us tackle climate change.
What will it ultimately take, though, to really signal a sea change in terms of, I mean, your state of California has taken a pretty definitive position on a new vehicle sales will have to be electric after, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 2035?
Yes.
Some European countries, Germany, for example, has taken a similar approach, but at the national level rather than at the state level. Do you think ultimately the federal government is going to have to make some of those decisions in order to really move forward?
I do. I think we ought to set those standards. I think those standards will be good for American business. It's good for us to lead in electric vehicles rather than allowing China to lead. And we could create the incentive to build those plants in places that have lost manufacturing. For example, Lordstown, Ohio lost an auto plant because we have a demand for SUVs over sedans. Well, why don't we incentivize that Lordstown, Ohio could become an electric vehicle plant manufacturer or a battery manufacturer? One of the things that's interesting is a lot of the component parts of electric vehicles could be made in the United States. So we have to have a real view of how we reindustrialize America. And if we do that, it can be towards climate change, tackling it, but also towards job creation.
Yeah, there's a bit of a myopic view on electric cars. I mean, certainly right now, Tesla is the lion's share of the market, and those are American vehicles. It's unbelievable what's going on. But when you look at Rivian, you look at Polestar, you look at what clearly is a growing presence of Chinese electric vehicles, there's a particular window of opportunity right now that it sounds like you're saying should be seized before this goes elsewhere.
Exactly. And China currently leads in the electric vehicle market. I mean, they don't lead in the US market, but they lead in the China market and the worldwide market. And a lot of the electric vehicle manufacturers, despite Tesla, are there. So we don't want China to eventually be exporting to Europe and to be exporting to the rest of the world. We want our companies to do that. And that's why it has to be collaborative with the government and the private sector to innovate.
Last thing I want to ask about, two structural issues that we talk about so much in terms of how future elections will work. Those are campaign finance, how our elections are financed and paid for, and also how we count votes, right? The idea of first past the post within an electoral college system. Do you see the possibility of any reform or changes on either of those two issues in the next 2 years? Is there even an appetite for it right now within the Biden administration and the Democratic Party?
Well, HR1 is all about this, and its big idea is to give individuals matching funds to be able to contribute,
Yes.
to eliminate big money, to help have redistricting reform. I think it'll pass the House. Again, the question becomes what happens in the Senate.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes what parts will a Roberts Court hold constitutional. My view is the simplest thing is to make every voter a donor, give every person a $50 credit to be able to use on campaigns to democratize finance and lessen the value of big money.
Yeah, well, I mean, one interesting piece I read said that that's a great half measure, but ideally you would eliminate all of that and simply have straight public financing of elections. Do you see that democratization of funds as an intermediate step or as the end goal?
I see it as an intermediate step. I mean, I would love public financing of elections, but that just would be struck down as unconstitutional under the way this court has held
Right.
Buckley v. Vallejo and understanding of money as speech. So the
Yep.
voucher proposal that Larry Lessig and some others have come up with is to say that it's constitutional even under a Roberts court. And if we can't get rid of the billionaires spending money, at least we can dwarf them with citizen resources. And so that's the idea. But obviously it is a half measure.
Absolutely. Last thing, we just learned about Joe Biden's plan to essentially pack the Postal Service Board of Governors, adding 3 individuals so that then Louis DeJoy could be removed. Does that sound to you like it will happen as smoothly and as quickly as some are hoping?
It should. I hope so. I applaud the president for doing that. I mean, Louis DeJoy was just a disaster, not just because of his trying to play games with the election, but his view that you would basically privatize the post service. And that was never the intention. When private companies can explain to me how they're going to guarantee mail going across country for 50 cents at the speed it does, then we could talk. But the reality is they can't. And there's a reason that we have a postal service that is a public entity, and we shouldn't be privatizing the few public entities that are working in this country.
Absolutely. Let's hope it does happen that quickly and smoothly. Congressman Ro Khanna, of course, from California's 17th district. Always great catching up with you.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me as always.